Welcome to Central News. I'm Hilary Entwistle. In today's news, appalled by New Zealand's tragically high youth suicide rate, Waikato DHB registered nurse Kahui Neho is geared up to raise some decibels for a good cause. Ms Neho, who has worked in the Henry Rongomo Bennett Centre for 4 years, has teamed up with motorbike club the Super Māori Fellas to launch the Riders Against Teenage Suicide RATS Green Ribbon Ride campaign. They will ride until Hopu Hopu on Harley-Davidsons alongside an estimated 50 plus others for a Pōwhiri and Family Day on the 23rd of March. Ms Neho says their greatest desire is that the campaign will show youth and their families that there is support available.
The vision of the Super Māori Fellas and the Green Ribbon campaign is to walk side by side iwi organisations and service providers and get them known to those who, there's a lot of people out there that have been waiting for the Green Ribbon campaign to come. They don't know who's out there. You know, we've spoken with families who have been affected directly by youth suicide. They don't know who to go to, so it's an important issue for us. So that's our vision, is to walk side by side, promote iwi organisations and service providers to let people know who's out there.
The New Zealand Transport Agency is seeking public feedback on proposed changes to child restraint legislation. The proposed changes would raise the upper limit for the mandatory use of child restraints from age 4 to age 6 before their 7th birthday, while maintaining the requirements for children aged 7 to use a child restraint if one is available. David Perks from the New Zealand Transport Agency says the proposals are part of the government's action towards meeting its goal of bringing New Zealand's child restraint laws in line with international best practice, as outlined in the Safer Journeys to 2020 Road Safety Strategy.
Yeah, there's two others. So, the main one is that increasing the age from 0 to under 7 in terms of child restraints, but the two others are, at the moment there's an anomaly in the Land Transport Act, which means if a child needs an exemption so they shouldn't be wearing a seatbelt for medical reasons, it's only if they're 5 years and older. What we're saying is it should be for any age child, so we're extending the exemption to cover all children of all ages. The second one is for a heavy vehicle, which is a vehicle that's 2,000 kilograms unladen or over. At the moment, if it isn't fitted with seat belts, you don't need to restrain your child. What we're saying is in the future, it doesn't matter on the weight of the vehicle, you do have to have a child restraint in place, and so that exemption will disappear for those type of vehicles.
Now for our region's weather. Hamilton, your Wednesday will be mostly fine with a few cloudy periods and light winds. Your expected high is 26 and an overnight low of 12. Tauranga, your Wednesday will be mostly fine with a few cloudy periods too, but you will have sea breezes instead. Your expected high is 24 and an overnight low of 17. Just ahead, advice on problem gambling. Welcome to Central News on TV Central. If you are struggling with a gambling addiction, we have some advice as we catch up with Cheryl Smith.
The councils review their gambling policy every so often, every few years, and it's really important for us to be involved in that process because, as you know, probably across the country in a year we lose about $2 billion in gambling overall. And that's such a huge number that we can't sort of get our head around it, eh? But if we think of it as $3,600 for every man, woman and child, that kind of brings it into perspective of how much money that's what's being lost. So when the councils and their local bodies do their reviews, it's really important for us to look at what's happening with the local policy and see what improvements we can support and encourage the councils to make.
Wow, that is a crazy amount. So what happens in that process?
Yeah, well, this year there's quite a few in our area. Matamata Piako is one. Hamilton City Council has got a review as well. Western Bay of Plenty is due now, and South Waikato as well. We've already done reviews this year for Waipa and Ruapehu, so we've already put some submissions in for those. But yeah, those are all the current reviews that are happening, and what the council do, sometimes they'll just look at their policy and roll it over. Sometimes they need a full public consultation depending on the frequency of the review, and so we're wanting people to have a look at that and see what they would like to have happen and have a voice in that process. So the council will issue an invitation at some point and say, you know, would people like to make submissions, and that can be written or appearing in front of the council to say what they believe should happen, especially with pokie machines we're interested in, yeah.
Now, I understand that Hamilton City Council has a sinking lid policy at the moment. So what does that mean?
Yeah, the sinking lid is a really useful way of reducing the number of pokies over time. So not that long ago we had about 18,000 machines in the country. That was down from 24,000 at some point. It was that high. Now we're under the 18,000. I think it's about 1,760 or so. And the sinking lid policy means that the machines can't be replaced. If a business closes or for some reason the machines are not being used in the venue anymore, they can't be replaced, or new machines can't come in as well. And so over time, just as things change, the number of pokies overall goes down. In Hamilton City Council, we've got a sinking lid that means that there are some exceptions. If businesses want to change premises, that kind of thing, the council will look at that as special circumstances. And in some places, once they go, they go. So Christchurch was a really good example with the earthquake. They lost 200 machines because of that. They weren't able to replace them.
So why is reducing the number of pokie machines particularly important?
Yeah, I guess because, you know, pokie harm is the biggest amount of our work at Problem Gambling Foundation. It's the most risky product in terms of gambling, and because of frequency and access to the machines, especially in our deprived communities, problem gambling is contributing a large amount to those losses that we talked about earlier. So some of the losses are just people, you know, having a go at something, or, you know, gambling occasionally, but a large proportion of it is coming from problem gambling, and because that's the highest risk one with pokie machines, that's where we want to see a reduction, yeah.
So let's talk about the effect of harmful gambling on families.
Yeah, I think it's useful just to keep that in mind, because, you know, especially when we're looking at council reviews, it's a formal process and there's lots of facts and figures that need to be included. But for me, you know, the most important thing is that families are suffering with gambling harm, and that means real people with stress, unpaid bills, you know, arguing and fighting with each other, sometimes getting violent with each other, and kids missing out on things that they need just to live, you know, like food and money for school, and also their relationships with their family too. If somebody's distressed with their gambling problem, they're not really being present for the others that they care about, because their choice has been taken away at that point. Yeah.
As part of your health promotion role, what are you doing at the moment?
Yeah, mostly what I want to do is be raising awareness for people, you know, like about how risky the product is in terms of pokies. But yeah, generally in terms of gambling harm, we do stalls, I do presentations to groups on invitation, staff training for organisations where they might be referring clients. Yeah, and all kinds of things that will encourage people to be aware of what's going on and to have a say. Yeah.
Wow, sounds like you're very busy. So tell me, what would Problem Gambling Foundation like to see happen in the local gambling policy reviews this year? Yeah,
some of them have caps. Some of the local councils have caps, and we would like to see those move to sinking lids. And when I say a cap, I mean they've got a maximum number of machines for the area. So like Matamata Piako, for example, have got a maximum of 201. But there's less machines in that already, so if we can get that put in as a sinking lid and then the machines keep reducing over time, all the better. That's what we hope for all the councils, is that they maintain or create a sinking lid for their area.
So for anyone watching who wants to get involved, what can they do?
Yeah, absolutely. Get in touch with us at Problem Gambling Foundation. Free, confidential conversations can happen with, you know, our staff. And looking up our website, getting involved on Facebook, have a say, join our supporters, you know, and just keep up to date with all the information that's going to be in the media as well. And I guess we'll keep talking about it as it gets closer to those review times too, and let people know what they can do.
Free phone 0800 664 262 if you are in need of some advice. Coming up next, New Zealand Book Month. Welcome back. As part of New Zealand Book Month, we are chatting to some local authors. Tonight we have Warren from Tauranga. Warren, what is your book about?
Well, the title says it all, Hilary. It's 101 Hot Tips for Health and Happiness. And I've been looking at lifestyle choices for the last 35 years, come up with some interesting conclusions, and these conclusions have been put together in a kind of concise, handy self-help book, which everybody, I think, can use quite happily.
So what was your inspiration to actually write the book?
Gosh, it wasn't really so much an inspiration. It was almost like being pregnant and having to give birth to something. And so it didn't take long, really. You know, it was something that I did mainly for the children and for our grandchildren, because I wanted to help them sort of jump over the potholes in life, really. And you know, it's hard to put old head on young shoulders, but this is my attempt to do just that. And so I guess for our kids and grandkids, that was the inspiration.
Because this is the first book that you've actually written. How did you find that writing process?
Well, this was really quite easy. You know, it didn't take too long, probably about 2 weeks of writing, and so it flowed fairly well. The difficult part is getting it published. That was something that I hadn't had any experience with. Fortunately, I come across a group called Ocean Books, and they helped me through that process. Now we're into the marketing process, which is even more difficult, so we're just starting that now. Mm.
Do you think it didn't take you that long to write it because it was just knowledge that you had?
Yes, yeah. It was built up knowledge over, you know, sort of 40 years, I guess, of looking into the health sciences and studying it on a regular basis. So it was just time to really get it out, and hopefully, you know, people enjoy reading it, yeah.
And because a lot of us will always feel tired and run down. When do you think there's that kind of trigger to know that we do need a health makeover?
Okay. I think if you're feeling tired and run down and irritable and depressed, then that's a sure sign that you need a health makeover, you know. And you only have to look at our children, you know, when they're born, they're always happy and vibrant, full of health, full of energy, you know. And if we're not like that, then we must be doing something wrong. And so I think if we are in a position of distress, then we need to seriously look at our lifestyle and do something about it if we need to. Mm.
What are your tips to kind of changing that lifestyle?
Well, 101 hot tips is probably the essence of it. But I would say that if you can look at your food first of all, and you know that includes your water intake. Try and eat natural food, obviously, is the way to go. Also, your spiritual lifestyle is really important, particularly for your happiness. And so, yeah, so...
Because, I mean, you are particularly interested in helping people with depression. What are your tips around that?
Unfortunately, there's a lot of depression around in the world at the moment, and I think it's the Western lifestyle that really creates this largely. If I had any tips for it, it would be that we first of all look at our spiritual life. You know, our purpose in life really is spiritual, it's not material. We should grow closer to God as we get older, and I think, you know, through prayer and meditation, that type of thing, we can learn how to develop our purpose in life. But as far as our physical health goes, you know, I think we need to really, first of all, get the knowledge about what keeps us mentally alive, you know. And there's a brilliant book called Optimum Nutrition for the Mind, written by Patrick Holford. And that is, I would say, recommended reading for counsellors or teachers or even parents, because it tells us how to keep our minds, you know, tuned and really active, and to stop this depression and so forth, yeah.
I think that is really important, isn't it? Because we often quite focus on keeping our body healthy,
Yeah, true.
But, you know, we kind of neglect our mind.
That's true, yeah. And I figure that if we do what's right for our body, you know, our mind is part and parcel of that, and that should benefit by it as well. So, I mean, if you're depressed, there are a few things that you can do, like there's herbal supplements. One is St John's wort. The other is a product called 5-HTP. Getting outside, you know, in the sunshine and the fresh air, exercising is really important for depression. So all of these things, yeah, just being.
Because with self-help books, I mean, I read a lot of self-help books. A lot of the problem is actually applying the methods that you've read about.
Sure.
Do you have some tips for that?
Yeah, you know, there's no point in reading a self-help book unless you're actually going to put it into practice, I think, you know. So start off with the idea of actually putting it into practice. Otherwise it's a wasted how many hours, you know, of reading it. I guess eating the elephant one bite at a time would be a good bit of advice, you know. Just choose something that you can do that's relatively easy for a start, like drinking enough water, for instance, you know. Without water in our bodies, they don't function very well. So that's an easy one to start. Drink lots of water, you know. It helps our mind, it helps our bodies, our cells work properly, helps us, you know, go to the toilet. It's great stuff. So, and then once you know how well that works, get on to perhaps eating a better diet and make a habit of these things, you know. It doesn't take any longer to prepare and eat healthy food, you know, than it does junk food. So why not, you know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yes, hopefully we can escalate and do it all 101. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so little by little, I guess, is the way to do it, yeah.
Just ahead, the Greens and fracking. If you have just joined us, welcome to Central News. The interim report on fracking was released in November, so Amy caught up with the Green Party's spokesperson on energy about fracking to see what their views are.
So fracking is the process of extracting oil and gas and involves pumping a large quantity of fluid, chemicals and a material like sand under great pressure in a vertical or horizontal well. The point is to try and get previously inaccessible bubbles of oil and gas. It's taken off in America. We've been using it for about 20 years in New Zealand, but we're on the cusp of a massive expansion of fracking across many regions of the country.
So there is fracking currently happening in New Zealand?
Yeah, it has happened. It is currently happening in New Zealand. It has happened since the early 1990s. We've only fracked around less than 70 wells, so there's been a great deal of uncertainty around the number of wells. The process has been less than transparent over the last couple of decades. It's taken the Parliamentary Commission of the Environment to actively dig in and find where fracking has occurred. It's happened a tiny bit in Southland, a little bit in the Waikato, but the vast bulk of it's happened in Taranaki.
Now, an interim report by the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment concluded that fracking could be carried out in New Zealand if managed properly. So do you agree with this report?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't portray the PCE's report as a green light to fracking. I see it more as a number of red flags. She says it can be well managed, but she doesn't give us that assurance that it is, or will be, or has been. I've had huge concerns with what we've seen with the fracking practices across the country, but particularly in Taranaki. I don't think it's been up to scratch. I don't think it's been best practice, and I don't have confidence we are going to see it well managed in the future. Ultimately, this is an interim report. We've still got to see the recommendations in the final report. But those red flags the PCE mentions are the light-handed, fragmented regulation, the self-regulation of the industry. She notes the industry has no social licence to operate. Environmental risks can occur. So until we have all these protections and safeguards in place, I don't think it should be expanding across the country. The oil and the gas isn't going anywhere. There's no rush to frack it. We should make sure we do have all the right rules and regulations and monitoring in place before we allow it to expand.
Now also, Prime Minister John Key said in response to this report that he was not concerned with the industry being self-regulatory at the moment. Are other utility services such as water supplies in New Zealand self-regulatory?
Well, I think, with all due respect to the Prime Minister, it's not what Kiwis need from a government. We actually need active government looking after our interests. We've seen with tragic and huge cost, the failures when we do regulation up to the industries. Every industry needs its own particular level of regulation. What we're talking about here is an industry which huge risks can occur. There's worker and health and safety issues. There's real environmental risks, which the Parliamentary Commissioner pointed out in her report, which need to be planned for, addressed and mitigated. So this is an area where we do need greater regulation. We just can't leave it up to the industry. We've got to remember that this wasn't even consented for 2 decades in Taranaki. Until mid-2011, you didn't need a consent for fracking, which I believe is outrageous and has led to the lack of public data about the chemicals and what's gone down in these wells and the waste disposal. So it hasn't been on to date, and that's why we need to make sure we get all these rules and regulations sorted before we allow new wells to be fracked across the country.
And the Green Party wants a moratorium on fracking. Why is that?
Well, we think this is the responsible, prudent step. There are huge questions which the Parliamentary Commissioner couldn't answer, which the government hasn't been able to answer. We know our councils, particularly in the regions where fracking is likely to occur but hasn't occurred to date, they've got huge questions how they're going to deal with it given their lack of expertise and experience. So given there are so many huge questions, given the oil and gas isn't going anywhere, I think it would be responsible to take a break, have a cup of tea, as a famous Prime Minister once said, and make sure we've got the rules and regulations sorted before we allow it to occur. Our natural environment, the health and safety of our communities is too important to gamble with. A number of other countries, from France to European countries to states in Australia, have put very tight restrictions or bans and moratoriums on fracking. So we're actually an international outlier. I understand only China and New Zealand are the only 2 countries where fracking has occurred that does not have any form of regional or statewide or country moratoria in effect. So it's about being responsible. It's not saying no forever. It is about protecting our environment and health and safety though.
So what is the process of gaining a moratorium?
Clearly the ball's in the government's court. Unfortunately, they've been acting as the chief cheerleader for the fracking industry. It's disappointing because there are those real risks, but I think there are other parts of the economy we could be supporting with the same level of focus and attention this government's giving to fracking. We know there's hardly any jobs, hardly any royalties, hardly any taxes compared to other industries. So if jobs or development is the question, I think fracking is the wrong answer. We should be looking at clean energy, where there's greater international investment than there is in fossil fuels in 2011.
That is the news for today. We really want you to be involved. So like us on Facebook and let us know your views. If you have news including your own video and photos, go to our website and hit upload. Thanks for joining us. I will be back tomorrow night with more guests from in and around the regions. I'm Hilary Entwistle. Have a lovely evening.
This has been an Alpha Media production, a division of Television Media Group.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.